Hello, welcome everybody. We're coming to you from my office. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And in honor of Valentine's Day, we're going to talk a little bit about marriage records and some of the clues you can find in them. I'll show you how to find some of the records that we have available on Ancestry.com and also some alternative sources because sometimes those marriage records just aren't available to us. So let's get started here. I'm going to flip over to my screen. First of all, the best way to get familiar with what's available on Ancestry.com is a quick trip to the card catalog. And as it loads, you can see it loads all of the collections we have, but we can go and narrow our search using the filters on the side to birth, marriage, and death, and then to marriage and divorce. And we can even choose locations. You can see we have quite a few international collections, as well as a growing collection of U.S. vital records. And we can go in and even go further and narrow our search for perhaps the state where your ancestor lived. And you can see here we have a large collection of Florida marriages. There's more than 11 million records in this collection. And there's a couple date ranges up here in the title. To learn more about what's included in an individual collection, it's a good idea before you start searching to go down beyond the search box and look at the description. And you can see that this collection is actually a compilation of 3 different collections that were indexed by different organizations, by Ancestry, by the Florida Department of Health, and by an independent research organization. Also included in the description is where to go from here. A lot of times, in this case, with these Florida records, you're going to be looking at an index of marriage records and not the actual record itself. And you can see here that we've got the Department of Health URL here for you, so you could go there and figure out how to actually obtain a copy of the actual record. Another thing too, these indexes also include a county code, and if you go down, we've got a little table here that tells you what code is associated with what county, so you could figure out what county they were married in. So a lot of helpful information in the description. And we'll go ahead, I'm going to show you an example of a marriage record. Oh, one other thing, if we don't have all the collections available on Ancestry.com, we don't have every vital record. We're working hard to get as many as possible up. But if you can't find the records for the places where your ancestors lived, here's another cool resource that we have. And this is on the search tab. You just click on that search tab and you can go and select a location, and it'll take you to a place page. And the place page is another great way to scan what we have available. And you can see we just added these church and town records, and I'll show you an example from that collection in a few minutes, because that's a really exciting one that we just got. But also there's a resources tab. So when there's a collection that we don't have, if you have to go for marriage records for a state where we don't have them online, this is a really helpful tab here. You can go ahead and you can see we've got links to the places you need to go to find the records. So you could click through to this marriage and divorce certificates page, and that'll give you more information on how to request the records of your ancestor. So let's flip over. I'm going to flip over to the slides here. This is an example of around the turn of the century marriage record. This is my great-grandparents, and this is some of the great things that you can find on a marriage record. You can see that it gives the groom's name, his age, where he was living. In some cases, I've seen for some of my New York ancestors, it'll actually give you a street address, which is very helpful. His occupation was a coal miner. His father was John Zooks, and his mother's maiden name was Susanna Powell. And also the bride, Miss Teresia Skokan, she was 20 years of age, a resident of Connersville in this county, his birthplace in Hungary. Unfortunately, they didn't give us the town name in this record, but her father's name was John Skokan, and her mother was Elizabeth Harsanyi. So a lot of helpful information. Sometimes you'll also find the name of witnesses on the collection, like this record. This is from those Pennsylvania church and town records that I told you about. And we just added 7.5 million records to this collection. They were added in January of 2012. And I want to give a little shout out to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. We partnered with the Historical Society to make these records available. And I want to take you over real quickly to their webpage, hsp.org, because I want to tell you real quick about a little event. We're actually going to be appearing, we're going to have an Ancestry Day at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And again, that URL is hsp.org. And you can see here, they've got a little collection of windows here, and if you page forward, you can see the registration for HSP Ancestry Day, and that'll be in Philadelphia on March 3rd. I'll be out there as well as some of my other co-workers, and we're going to talk a little bit about these records and also some other things that you can do on Ancestry.com. So back to our slide here, we have the same type of information, not quite as much detail on these, but this collection is really great because it includes not just marriage records, it also includes births, baptisms, confirmations, church registers. It's like this huge collection of really rich, wonderful records. So a really helpful thing to know about if you've got people in Pennsylvania. Sometimes you may end up, if their civil registration wasn't available at the time when your ancestors were married, you may end up having to turn to church records. They're a great resource. This is a letter that my mom sent to a church in New York where her great-grandparents were born in the 1860s. And so what we have to do sometimes is give them a little bit of information. What you can do is try and narrow the date of your ancestors' marriage by using timelines. And timelines are really easy to construct. Just arranging the records that you have and the places that you know where you know your ancestors lived chronologically can kind of give you a little look at, okay, they were probably married within this time frame here, and this is where they were living about that time. And so that's a really helpful thing to do. And you can include that information when you're requesting records from either a municipality or from a church. When you're looking for what church to request the records from, here's a tip: check historical city directories. Ancestry.com has a large collection of city directories, and search it for that location and use the keyword churches, because city directories usually include a list of churches that are in the city, and they'll be listed by denomination typically. You can go in and look and see which churches were close to where your ancestors lived and are most likely the places where they were married, possibly. Also, newspapers are a great resource. Search for engagements, not just marriage announcements, but engagements, and also anniversary announcements can include a lot of helpful details. In the Thompson-Webster one, I thought this was a really interesting one. Mabel Webster of Spokane was married to Thomas H. Thompson, and it says only relatives of the groom were present, and the whole affair was a secret until the couple reached Alameda on Wednesday evening. So, surprise, mom and dad, I'm married. That's a little interesting tidbit for the family history. Also, there's another one down here that it's an engagement notice, and it talks about how they met on board a yacht. So another little tidbit that you might not have been passed down through the family history that you can now add to their story. And then again, here, anniversaries. Look, if you have an estimate of the date, look 25 years later. A lot of time you'll find some details in an anniversary announcement. This was an anniversary from a Bridgeport, Connecticut newspaper. And it talked about the 25th wedding anniversary with a dinner in their home. Here's the date they were married. They were married in the Hungarian Reformed Church in Bridgeport. And it even gives the list of the attendants at their wedding. So neat information. And the wedding announcement, sometimes especially if it was a big wedding, a big social to-do, a lot of times you'll find wonderful descriptions of the weddings. I've seen some fantastic ones where the dresses and everything, the food that was served is all described. So a lot of really great things in historical newspapers. And even beyond the background information, that letter that we got from the Catholic Church that talked about William and Catherine's wedding, this is the front page in the New York Times on the day they were married, April 11th, 1865. And when you look at what was going on and what was making news in the paper on the day they were married, the people in New York were rejoicing for them probably, but also for the fact that the Civil War had just ended. So a lot of interesting things. You can even look for the weather. What was the weather like that day? It was rainy, and you can kind of picture them running into the church, dodging the raindrops. So a lot of interesting things that can help you fill in that story where the story hasn't been passed down. Also, look at, think outside the box. What other records might include information about a marriage? Here's an example of a Revolutionary War pension file where Hannah Pettit is trying to prove that she was married to this veteran, Mark Adams. And she goes in and she talks about how she was married and the Reverend Duffy married her. And the next page it tells you here's the name of the church where they were married. There's the date of their wedding. And also another little tidbit at the bottom here, it talks about the house. She doesn't have the certificate to prove it. So because the house in which she lived was destroyed by fire. So she lost all her documentation. So she goes on to provide the names of a couple witnesses to the wedding, and they go in and testify. And so their testimony is there that yes, indeed, we were at this wedding and we know that they were married. So a lot of details you can get in pension records and thinking outside the box, anything that might even mention that wedding. And also, don't forget to save all those wonderful stories and the pictures to your family tree. You want to preserve these things. And I'll show you real quickly how you can do that. This is one of my family trees, and we'll go into my grandma here. And you can see you can go into the family tree and you can add photographs and different images. If you go down here, you can also add stories. And there's a couple options for you when you want to add one. You can just, if you have one in a Word document or something, you could upload it from your computer there. Or you can just go in and start typing. You know, if there's a story that was handed down about how a couple met, you know, something interesting with where they went on their honeymoon. These are the kind of things that we could preserve in our stories. And you just would type in your story in the description, the location, the date, and you can even add other people. You could add it to both the husband and the wife so that that story is saved to both of them. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick little trip through marriage, Whirlwind Marriage Records Talk. Check out our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/ancestry.dot.com. And come visit us again for another of our Facebook live stream events.